So now we're going to go ahead and talk about section 1.7. It's multiplication and division of real numbers. So we call the result of multiplication a product. So this is going to be called the product of two real numbers. So there's some particular rules, especially when we're multiplying negative numbers to positive numbers, and negative numbers to negative numbers, and positive numbers to positive numbers. So these slides will help you to identify the rules you should follow when you're doing multiplication of real numbers. The product of two real numbers with different signs. So if you have a negative and a positive, and you multiply them together, your product is going to be a negative. That's really important to remember. A negative times a positive equals a negative all the time. If you have two numbers with the same sign, either both positive or both negative, when you multiply those together, the product is going to be positive. So a negative times a negative equals a positive, as well as a positive times a positive equals a positive. The last thing you need to take note of is the product of 0 and any number is equal to 0. What that means is any number you can think of, 1,000,000 times 0 still equals 0. Any variable times 0 still equals 0. So think of a variable x times 0 still equals 0. Here's some simple examples. We see we have a positive 5 times a positive 5. They have the same sign, right? Both positive. They equal positive 45. We have a negative 2 times a negative 3. They have the same sign, both negative. The product is equal to a positive 6. Like I said, two negatives equal a positive. Here we have a negative 7 times a positive 4. Different signs, therefore, oops, looks like the slide made a mistake here. It should be a negative 28. When they have different signs, it should be a negative 28. And over here we have 0 times 7. We know that anything times 0 is equal to 0. Multiplication, multiplying more than two numbers. There's some easy ways to deal with this. We'll go ahead and show you a couple of ways. But what you have to know is the product of an even number of negative numbers is positive. So that means if we have, if we're multiplying 10 numbers together and they're all negative, well, 10 is an even number, so the end result should be a positive because we have 10 negative numbers. It's an even number of negative numbers, which is makes it a positive. If we have, let's say, 11 negative numbers, multiplying them all together, we know our product is going to be negative because 11 is an odd number of negative numbers. Same thing though, if we have a 0 anywhere in there, if we have 1,000 terms and multiplying by each other and one of them is 0, the same thing, the same rule applies. The answer is still going to be 0. So here's an example of what may look like a pretty difficult problem, but we can go ahead and work through it. Multiply negative 3 times negative 5 times positive 2 times negative 7. So if we count the number of negative signs in here, we have 1, 2, 3 negatives. That's an odd number. That means our product should be a negative, as it is. And we can go ahead and multiply the numbers out and we get 210. So the answer is negative 210. Now if we multiply this chain of numbers out, we see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 negative numbers. And like I said, if we have an even number of negative numbers, the result is positive. So 4 is an even number. Therefore, our answer has to be positive, and of course, and if you multiply this out, it would equal 144, positive 144. Some simple definitions of division. When we have the numbers a divided by b, it's simply equal to a times the inverse of b, or 1 over b. That's all we're saying. We learned way back when we did fractions that when we're dividing fractions, we get the second number and we flip it and multiply. That's all we did here. That's exactly what we did here. So the quotient of two real numbers is pretty much saying this is division operation. Anytime you see the word quotient, it means a division operation. And the quotient is the result. So the quotient of two real numbers with different signs is found to be dividing their absolute values. A quotient is negative. So the same rules apply just as in multiplication. If you have an odd number of negative values, your answer is going to be negative. If you have an even number of negative values, your answer is going to be positive. Division of any number of any non-zero number by 0 is undefined. That means if you have 0 on the bottom, your answer is going to be undefined. If you have any non-zero number divided into 0, that means 0 is on the top, your answer is going to be 0. And here's some examples of what we're talking about. Here we're dividing negative 16 divided by 4. Negative 16 divided by positive 4. We see we have one negative number. Since it's an odd number of negative numbers, our answer is going to be negative. And of course 16 divided by 4 is 4. Here we have negative 12 divided by negative 2. Again, we have a even number of negative numbers. Okay, 2 negatives is, we know the number 2 is an even number, so therefore our answer has to be positive. So negative 12 divided by negative 2 is equal to positive 6. Additional properties of multiplication. A times 1 is just equal to A. Okay, it doesn't change it at all. 1 times A is still just equal to A. So we're going to use this property over and over and over again in algebra. Okay, anything times 1 is still just itself. The inverse property of multiplication, if in this can only apply if A is not equal to 0, is A times the inverse of A is equal to 1, because the A on top cancels with A on bottom, and we know that 1 divided by 1 is equal to 1. Similarly, if we have 1 divided by A times A, again the A on top and A on bottom cancel to equal 1. 1 times 1 is equal to 1. So these are really good properties to remember. We'll be using these over and over and over again throughout our college career in math. Some more properties. We're going to be talking about multiplication of property of negative 1. Negative 1 times A is equal to negative A. A times negative 1 is equal to negative A. So anytime we have a negative 1 times any number, it's just going to change the sign to a negative. In the case you have a negative, a double negative property, such as a negative times a negative 1 times a negative A, well, the two negatives turn into a positive, so we end up with a positive A. So here we have negative times a negative A is equal to a positive A. Negative signs and parentheses. What we have to do here is we have to use pretty much the distributive property, and we distribute that negative sign appropriately. Here we see we have negative 8x plus 7. Since we have a negative out in front, anything inside the parenthesis has to get that negative sign. So we have to distribute that to the 8x, so that becomes negative 8x. This is a positive 7, so we have to make it to a negative 7. So negative 8x plus a negative 7. Here's another example. We have a negative outside times negative 6 minus 5. Again, we distribute that negative to everything inside. A negative times a negative equals a positive 6x. We have a negative times a negative 5, or minus 5, turns that into a positive. Two negatives equal positive, right? So now we have 6x plus 5. And now the last one, we have negative times a negative 5x plus 3. Again, we distribute the negative, we end up with 5x minus 3. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn the video off and restart. I'm running near my time limit on YouTube. So I'll finish it off the next section and maybe start some examples.